All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for those of you on East Coast time. Thanks for joining us today. Adrian, maybe we could push forward to our agenda slide. So our agenda for the day, or maybe Rob, do you have control of this? I'm sorry. There we go, thanks. So our agenda for today, continuing with our three-part series, around asset management. We'll take a quick minute and just reintroduce our speakers here. Do a quick review of the last two sessions that we've covered around, a crawl, walk, run strategy, and then we'll spend the bulk of our time diving into some best practices and demonstrations around achieving level 3 maturity with these initiatives, and then we'll wrap up with a Q&A session and some takeaways for everybody. As a reminder, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can feel free to submit questions at any time during the session just by clicking on that screen and entering your question there, and we'll see it and address it as well. Thank you. Rob, if we can, thank you. So our speakers today, Paul Bussiere, who is a principal consultant and leads our ITAM initiative and practice here at T4S Partners, is with us. Paul, thanks for being here. And then Rob Ferrillo, who's the Director of Solutions Engineering for the EXM product suite at Avanti. And Rob, just congratulations to you on your recent promotion, well-deserved promotion, I may say, to that role. So congratulations. And then I'm Rob Ash. I'm the CEO here at T4S Partners. And for those of you that have been on these sessions in the past, I'm standing in for my partner, Bert Lasley, who's been facilitating these. So Rob, let's go forward. So after our first session, which was on setting the foundation and really emphasized the importance of having a comprehensive initiative that considered the components of people, process, and technology, as well as truly understanding that there is a difference between an asset and a configuration item. We dove in the second session to talk about impact analysis and understanding this life cycle that you see here of an asset, and the importance of managing from start to finish in order to drive out the proper benefits, and really talked a lot about the criticality of data here in these initiatives, and having your arms around that data and managing it accordingly. And having been a part of a lot of these, I can attest personally that is always a huge issue, and you'll continue to hear our team talk about that. And so today, Rob and Paul are going to talk about driving up the maturity pyramid and to that level 3 of maturity with your program. So Rob, with that, if we could advance one more, and I think Paul, you're gonna pick up here.
Yep. All right. Well, great. Thanks, Rob. So today, So today we're talking about reintroducing the pyramid. For those who've been joining us in the other sessions, this is something familiar. Again, what we're doing here is just moving up to that level 3 area today, which is what we'll talk about, which is around service management from the configuration management side, as well as software asset management on the asset management side. So, from a service management side of things, really what we're talking about there is that transition into business service management, where we're talking about essentially the focus here is transitioning from an infrastructure-based process, something where you're talking about the actual systems and such, and possibly, you know, as we talked about previously in impact analysis, is understanding those applications and moving that up the ladder to the business services, and essentially understanding these items, these functions and service things that you deliver, these applications in the context of the services that you're delivering to, and of course, this case, the business is really where we want to focus around, because that drives the most value and allows you to be able to then talk in context of the quality of service that you're delivering to the business, right? On the flip side of that, from an asset management perspective, we're going to be focusing or talking about software asset management, which is really, again, understanding license entitlements associated with the software that you run in your organization, both server side, desktop side, understanding that entirely, and being able to be in a position where you can understand what do I own and directly compare that to ultimately what do I have deployed. Because if anybody's gone through a software audit by a lot of these manufacturers out there, that's ultimately what they want to know. They want to know how, you know, how many installations do you have, and are you over the number of count that you're entitled to? And to be able to answer that question, there's a lot that goes involved into that, which is part of the reason why that's level 3, because you need to understand that from a hardware perspective. So we'll get a little bit more into that detail a little bit further down in the presentation. But a couple of things is just a quick review, some important notes around the maturity pyramid. So for those of you who weren't here previously, the maturity pyramid is really something that we put together, and it's arranged by outcomes. These outcomes are built upon each other, both from a process as well as data perspective. So again, as we sort of move up the pyramid, we're building upon these lower layers. We need to have those people, process, and technology in place in order to be able to make that next leap and be able to achieve the value that you're going to gain at that level, right? It's important to remember that these outcomes are aligned to the overall processes, both configuration management and asset management. We really wanted to make that distinction because a lot of times that can become very confusing in the way in which what you're attempting to try to achieve and ultimately what types of processes and certainly software and functions, tools do you have to have in place in order to achieve that, right? Often we talk about discovery. It's a very, misused sort of term in this context a lot of times, because discovery can mean a lot of different things depending on what your context is and certainly how you're using that, what data that discovery solution provides for you. So there's a lot of that kind of thing, and really what differentiating these two processes and really breaking them down and associating them. These are the things that we're going to do when we talk about configuration management versus these are the things that we can do when we talk about asset management. It really kind of helps drive that clear delineation against, tool sets, people, process, technology, and ultimately the value you get for that. So again, the purpose of these levels is to provide you the obtainable goals, outcomes, if you will, that can be clearly articulated, and a project can be formed around them, right? At each level of the pyramid, these activities are required to achieve the next level, as well as, obviously the process, people, process, and technology we talked about previously. I think it's important to mention here, specifically with service management, to achieve this level of maturity requires a significant commitment, usually from the top down. So this is where, again, we really need to understand and have our people and process aligned effectively in order to achieve this goal, right? There are a lot of moving parts that collectively can provide some amazing results, but we need to align several usually diverse functions or groups together to be successful. So it goes without saying that the importance of having a clear and concise plan as you approach this goal or this level it cannot be overstated, right? It's significant. It's the difference between, in my opinion, the difference between success and failure. And then from a software asset management, can be often you'll see this in many of the folks out there, they'll tell you that, software asset management can be one of the most beneficial processes that you can deploy in your organization to help derive or do cost avoids, right? The value you can gain that just from a costing perspective can be very significant. The amount of money that organizations, the larger you get, the more that you'll find that you end up with all of this overage. So a lot of times you're over licensed in many areas, and this is very common. And so being able to truly understand what it is that what you're entitled for versus what you have deployed, and then ultimately what you're using, those values can really drive down and streamline your overall costs in this area. So this is something that often many companies, when they learn about these things, they are become this. They can pay for your entire project multiple times over just by going through those cost savings. So. All right, next slide. So our first best practice is going to be focused around business service management. And the two areas that we focus on here from best practice perspective is starting with a customer, right? The importance of starting with a customer, and then of course, I'll get into this, as well as focusing on the service level agreements, or doing that last. Business service management as a presentation, this could be a presentation in of itself. I could spend a significant amount of time going into various aspects of business service management. This is a very large conversation. There's many aspects of this. But really what I want to do is just kind of touch on the very kind of high level and talk about some of the key areas. And obviously from the best practices here, we'll talk about what that really means. But really, before I get into it too far, we really kind of understand exactly what we're talking about when we talk about a service. And so, Itil defines a service as a means of delivering value to customers by facilitating outcomes customers want to achieve without the ownership of specific costs and risks, right? So what does that really mean in the context of BSM? So a service, a business service, is going to be a service that is consumed obviously by the business, right? The business services should be defined from the customer's point of view. And again, this goes back to this best practice. And then business services should have a service level agreement. So overall in the service management arena, a business service represents something very specific. So that's why, often in level 2, we talked about this differentiation between service mapping and application mapping, and focusing on the applications. And the reason for that, again, is, the importance here is we're transitioning from, infrastructure-based services, something that is specific to what we run from an IT perspective, to those things that are significant to the folks that are actually consuming the service. So again, from a best practice perspective, the business service, when you start building your business service catalog, you want to do that. You want to define those services from the customer's perspective. So as you begin to define these, you need to define who are your customers, right? And then identify who those customers are and what are the most important services that they consume. Okay, and this can begin back to understanding your customers, understanding how you're delivering those services. Again, by defining the service from the customer's perspective as well, you'll gain the ability to look at this from the entire service, because again, from the customer's perspective, the entire delivery, everything that's required to deliver that service is part of, or should be included in the definition of delivery of that service. So that means in some cases, I'll do this through an example. So as an example, we have email as a service, something that we deliver to a business. This may not different for everybody, but a lot of times when we think about, or traditionally what we did is when we defined service that really kind of focused around Microsoft Exchange, right? And many organizations, that was the delivery of mail for them. A lot of times this has happened and gone into software as a service and some other things now, but traditionally, if that's kind of the address, the way in which we address that. And again, that goes back to looking at it from the Microsoft Exchange perspective. That is what we would typically think is, managing the application or mapping the application. But however, when we look at it from a service perspective, we need to look at what's entirely required to deliver that service. And there are technical services that are required to deliver that. An example of that might be Active Directory, DNS, DHCP, SendMail. These are all technical services that the business service depends on, but are never seen by the customer. So these are all critical components to be able to define the service and be able to truly understand and deliver the service. Because if you're just managing your business service email as your ability to, Microsoft Exchange, the fact that the customer cannot actually log into Exchange or isn't receiving email externally or any of those kinds of functions, that is still, as far as they're concerned, that service is not performing. It's not effectively providing the value that it's supposed to. So again, it's very key to understand who your customers are, and then ultimately, how do you define that service from their purview, and being able to look at it entirely as a whole. The other area that we'll talk about here are the other best practices around SLA, and that takes go hand in hand, right? So if we don't understand, or we focus on some specific or a sliver of your business service, like looking at it from the Microsoft Exchange perspective, you may not necessarily include these other technical services. But if we were to define an SLA around that, how we deliver Microsoft Exchange email, we may have that being up 100% of the time. But if DNS or DHCP or Active Directory, one of these other technical services, have a much lower delivery requirement, or SLA or SLO in this context, then you can't deliver that SLA. That SLA can never be attained. So again, the idea here, or the best practice, is once we define the business service, once we understand and truly define the technical services or the applications that that business service requires to be delivered in its entirety, we can then understand how we deliver, or how we define an SLA to the business. Again, it comes down to, like, for example, in our example here with email, if, for example, SendMail may be delivered by some external customer or another group separate than the Exchange group. Maybe there's an NT group and a Windows group and a Unix group, and SendMail is delivered by the Unix group. Well, they may have only during business hours kind of response to SendMail, because they don't necessarily understand its importance in the delivery of the service email. So this is just an example, but certainly the best practice remains that we can't necessarily build an SLA where those technical service, or the elements that the service directly relies on, have a lower SLA or SLO in this context to deliver that SLA. So great. All right. I think we got a demonstration next.
Yeah, so to try to reinforce, everything that Paul just said, I thought I'd kind of show some of this within the Avanti platform. Avanti is very dashboard driven. We have lots of dashboards, 60 or 70 of them out of the box for all sorts of different roles. But I thought I'd start on the customer satisfaction dashboard, which kind of maps back to the end goal, which is keeping customers happy and being able to track those metrics over time and customer sat levels. One of the areas that we track as well is the satisfaction per service. So really understanding what is the satisfaction level at a service level, and really, as Paul had mentioned, understanding what your service is to really be able to do performance and quality of service. Within Avanti, you will define the service. The service is defined with multiple data points, such as the ownership of the service and the supporting team. But to highlight a couple of the things that Paul was mentioning, the supporting infrastructure beneath that service. So, for the data service and our database services to operate properly, the network has to be up and running, and that makes sense. And there's a relationship to our web hosting and ERP systems that rely on the data service. So all of these things are interconnected. And one of the things that Avanti has the capability of doing is working with event management solutions, SolarWinds or Microsoft SCOM or WhatsUp Gold or any of the monitoring tools and alert systems that are out there, Avanti can ingest them, and we can understand if any particular event is causing an outage within that service. Now, where that becomes particularly important is when we want to start doing analytic metrics on those services. So we provide a series of out-of-box dashboards, which will help you perform trending analysis and understanding the metrics that both the service desk and the service management platform as a whole are delivering. So this is a quick dashboard on the service desk metrics, which shows, VIPs that are in the queue and P1s. This dashboard here shows the cost analysis of different services, direct versus indirect costing, CapEx versus OpEx expenditures per service, because we do support financial management and tracking against each service. You can see the trending of those services over time, which services are costing the most money, and is there spikes that correlate with calendar events or other types of events. You can see which services are driving the most types of costs, whether they be subscription or labor. Again, we have all labor tracking within the platform if you choose to use it, around task management and cost time tracking that equates to the cost per team. We also have service consumption, so you can see which services are being consumed the most. In my case here, we've got the new employee setup consuming the most of all labor charges in my demo environment. And then of course our service availability, which maps back to our event management and understanding the uptime of services. So here services look pretty good. We're above our threshold with pretty much every service, but if we drill into it, doesn't mean the service isn't valuable, right? We have had service interruptions or disruptions within the service. Maybe we had degradation within the service, and we can drill into those dashboards and understand when and why, and correlate those with the events that have been coming into the system. So again, we're very dashboard driven, try to show you trending over time, map it back to the end goal, which is customer satisfaction. Within Avanti, the service is king. Everything revolves around the service. So setting up your services properly is very important, and an organization like T4S can certainly help you get that done correct the first time.
Great.
Okay, pass it back to you, Paul.
So the next up is a poll question. So does your company have any defined business services?
Thanks so much for participating in these polls. We've had great participation in them in the past. So thanks so much. We appreciate your responses.
Looks like we have quite a few that actually do have business services that are defined. That's great. Yeah, so those that have good business services defined, that's great. That's good start. One area that can help with this as well from a business service perspective can also be continuity management practice. So if you have a practice around continuity management, a lot of times if you place things in the context of a service from a continuity management perspective, you can align directly to the work that they're doing as well. So that's those two processes can go hand in hand there with that. Great. All right, moving on to the next. So best practice number 2 is focused around software asset management. There are actually 3 that I called out here from a best practice perspective here. First is, of course, knowing your entitlements, and I'll get into what all of that is, but this is key. You got to understand what your entitlements are, and then 2 is understanding your hardware. You talked about this in level 2, but it can't be overstated the importance of what hardware you have, both what hardware your software is running on, as well as what is the current status of that equipment, because it becomes incredibly important to understand the status of your hardware, because if you're tracking licenses for equipment that has been decommissioned or is no longer in use, you're paying for something that's not being used, right? So this becomes critical to be able to have that understanding your hardware. And then number 3 here is around leveraging a discovery tool that identifies licensable units. And we'll get into what a licensable unit is, but this is key. This becomes, we want to look at something specific from a discovery perspective that is going to tell us something comparable to our entitlement, because essentially, again, our entitlements are going to be something where we're wanting to know what you own and what you're entitled to from a software perspective, and that'll go directly into what a licensable unit is. So as I mentioned previously, the software asset management process can lead to some amazing results if done effectively, of course, right? In order to capture these benefits, it's important to focus in, these areas that I mentioned around know your entitlements, understanding your hardware, and leveraging your discovery tool. So from an entitlement perspective, it's important to understand what that really means. This is key with understanding what is licensed, right? So an entitlement represents essentially a software title, a version, and edition. It's those three bits of data that ultimately represent an actual entitlement. This also tells us, when we strip it down to those three components, we can then determine what are your upgrade and downgrade rights with that given title, or title, version, edition, because in some cases, depending on how you maintain your maintenance agreements, or whether or not you maintain your maintenance agreements, that can tell you whether or not you have rights to upgrade or downgrade based on the current version that you've purchased. Also, that when you start to begin to capturing the software titles you've purchased and begin to pull out the license entitlements. So where we have to go after this information is essentially your purchase agreement, the purchase agreements that you put in place. So we need to start reviewing that information. That'll be one of the key areas that you're going to be focusing on, is taking those things that you've purchased and turning that into a licensable unit, understanding it in that context. What software title, version, and edition did I purchase at this particular time? In many cases, certainly from a PO perspective, that can often not necessarily be defined in that context. It may, we may just state, oh, you purchased this version or this title, perhaps in some cases, or just that, piece of software. And it may not necessarily tell you what version or edition that you're actually purchasing. And so but that can be, critically important. We think about that in the context of things like, Visio. Do I have, Visio Enterprise? Do I have Visio Standard? Do I have, what version of Visio do I actually own? There are significant dollar values attached to those different editions, and they become extremely important. Also, this can also play a role in how that entitlement has been purchased as well. The contract in which you purchase that agreement can derive essentially your ability to upgrade and downgrade those rights. This becomes something, very complicated in the context of like, Microsoft, IBM, Oracle, these types of these manufacturers, or the software titles can be very complicated in the way in which you purchase that. So the perfect example for this is Microsoft. And if you purchase something through an enterprise agreement versus a select press agreement, the entitlements that you receive are different, and therefore your upgrade and downgrade rights are different depending on what kind of agreement you have. So understanding your entitlement as a whole, both the what am I entitled to, and then what the terms of that entitlement represent. Again, another area of this is understanding how you count that license. So in some cases, for example, perfect example is Microsoft SQL Server, the new version of SQL Server, everything's associated to the core count. Well, and then you have to count the number of cores. Well, you have to count the physical cores, because virtual cores don't count. They're all related to the physical cores that are on the virtual machine that you happen to be running on. So when you count these cores, you have to be very specific in the way in which you do count them. Don't get me started about IBM and the way that they count RSUs and all of these different kinds of crazy things that they do in managing your entitlements. But that's an area that understanding that information effectively is, 50% of trying to get there and be able to do your asset management, software asset management effectively. Another area again around understanding your hardware, and again, we talked about this in level 2, is that it's key, to understand again both what hardware you're running that software on. So how do I count, if it turns out I need to count the number of cores, I need to understand that piece of equipment, and I have to have that information readily available, especially if it changes. Because if you move or slide a VM into another environment or something along those lines, that could affect your licensing. So it's very important to truly understand what hardware the licensing or the software is running on, and what that really looks like, especially from a status as well, especially on an endpoint perspective. If you're paying for licensing for software that has been decommissioned, the person's no longer there, something along those lines, it's sitting in somebody's cabinet, right? Because somebody picked up that laptop when the person left, and they put the laptop in the cabinet. You're paying for a license, and you're possibly paying for maintenance for a license of software that's sitting on a device that's sitting in a desk. It's providing no value whatsoever, but you're paying all this money for that. So again, understanding that equipment, understanding that life cycle is critically important. And you can see that when we talk about this very specifically, you can see how some of the things that we talked about in level 2 become so important, especially in the way in which we perform the receipt process. So when we order equipment and we receive that equipment or software in this case, when we receive that, being able to receive that effectively becomes very important. What I mean by that is that if we're receiving, this becomes very important on the software side. If we receive a software entitlement, granted it's all virtual, it's all data on a sheet with the license number, I understand all of that. But it's still a requirement of being able to receive that, because when you receive that purchase, we want to understand the software title, version, and edition that was actually purchased. Because sometimes what will happen is you may be purchasing a specific title, Snagit, for example, and you continually purchase this same title. What may happen is that the version has changed while you're continuing to purchase this license. Well, if you're not necessarily maintaining your maintenance agreements for these titles, then you now have to really understand which one did I actually purchase? When did I purchase that? What's my upgrade and downgrade rights based on when I did purchase that? Again, that sometimes you can go up 2 versions, down to 2 versions, depending on what you're on the agreement. But again, it becomes critically important to really truly understand what am I purchasing, ultimately relates to what are my entitlements, and then what hardware is it running on. And then lastly, being able to help with this process is leveraging a discovery tool that's going to focus or provide you or normalize this information down into something that you can directly consume. If you try to do this with some other products that are out there that don't necessarily focus on something like a licensable unit, then you can spend basically most of your time trying to determine what actually is running on these machines. Is it what version or edition is actually running on this machine, and not having that information can be very time consuming. So it becomes critically important to be able to expedite this process by being able to have an output from your discovery tool that you can directly relate to your entitlement, and that information becomes, and if you can do that, then it becomes something where you can get to that value of being able to compare and understand whether or not I'm over or under allocated for a given title very easily. So, great. And moving on to demonstration number 2.
Thanks, Paul. I was just responding to a question in the Q&A. So Deborah, I saw your question about are there Avanti components that store device specs and also individual software system hardware requirements to enabling assigning a capable device per the required software load. So if I'm getting the question correctly, I think you're asking, does Avanti have sort of predefined groups or queries that would be aligned with manufacturer specifications and requirements, that you can then make sure that the devices that have the software meet the minimum specifications?
That's how I read the question. Yeah.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
think what we could do is, I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong here, Rob, but I think what you would be able to do is the discovery tools will give you the ability, they will give you the attributes that you would need to make that decision. So you probably could just generate a query that would say, okay, these are the available devices that we can install this software on based on the requirement. And then we can just use that query as a reoccurring sort of set that you can ensure that you have that. And then we can even, as you shown in the previously, we could even set up dashboards that would show where we have a mismatch in that context, where this doesn't, this is not on this, we've discovered the software, but it's not part of this list, and then look for that.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Hey,
Just
Deborah, can you just confirm that's addresses the question you had? I opened you up so you could talk here.
This is Deborah. Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
Yes, I think that is providing a solution to the issue, to the situation. The Avanti components can, I don't know if they automatically do a query, or we would upload a query result to load the specs and the system capabilities as a database and query a pairing. It's based on a query is what I'm getting.
Yeah, maybe I can kind of demonstrate that in a little bit here. So what you're looking at on the screen is a overall dashboard of a software breakdown. We've inventoried several hundred machines, and of those machines, about 324 have a client OS, 51 have a server OS. There's network gear and printers and switches in the database as well. There's 56,000 different software titles, but only 520 of them are licensable. So that starts to chunk it down into the things that we really need to manage. Now, how do we get to a dashboard like this? Well, it's not necessarily easy. I mean, Avanti makes it easy for you, but under the covers, it's really a challenge to do software asset management. The industry doesn't make it easy. We haven't made it easy for a long time. If you really think about what you get off of an individual computer, right now I'm looking at a Windows 10 machine. It's one of my lab devices, and it has an inventory back from Avanti. Avanti's discovery product will not only find this machine on the network for the very first time, if it's never been seen before, if it's been sitting in someone's desk drawer and they just turned it on for the first time in 3 months, you'll find it, you'll discover it, and you can get an inventory of it. The inventory will look like this. When we get down into the deep nuts and bolts of what comes back, when we start on the software side, it's not really pretty to start with. We get a list of add remove programs, right? That's what you can see if you go to the computer and wanted to figure out what software was installed. We get a list of all the things that have been installed to the MSI database. We query the MSI database. It gives us some additional information, sometimes about the same package that we found in add remove programs, but now we're able to pick up things like it's GUID, perhaps it's on install string, and some other information about the particular application. We also then scan all the executables on the drive. We check their CRC checksum and MD5 hash. We start tracking how many times they're being launched and all of their file header information. And we have to send all of this back up to the Avanti Neurons platform, where the brains and logic can start to take place. There's a definitive software library with over 450,000 titles that have been fingerprinted. There's SKU information for about 250 or 300,000 of those titles. So that includes the retail information, the license type, the end of life information about that particular software. So here we're looking at it in the raw format. Now, what we also retrieve within that inventory is everything you could think of about the processors, right? What's the speed, how many cores, how much memory is in the device, how many slots does it have, how much memory is located in each slot. So if you needed to do a memory upgrade or something like that, could you? Now you can use any of this information about how much free disk space there is, how much CPU and memory processing power, whatever the requirements are, to create software groups that you can then say, here are the machines capable of running Office 2020 or any other AutoCAD or any other particular type of software. We don't provide those pre-built groups, but they're very easy to create in the platform, and I'll show you in just a second. But before we go there, I mentioned that the brains happens up in the Avanti Neurons platform. We take all of that raw information that the agent has collected about every executable on the device and all of the software through add remove programs and the MSI database, and we process it. We normalize it, first of all, so that the vendor is the same every single time. And we separate out the standard software, like Google Chrome is on the machine. Good to know. We might need to know that someday. But what we really need to manage is the licensable units. So we automatically separate out from the inventory. These are the things that, well, in an ITAM, IA ITAM world, they'll say either costs you money, makes you money, or could put your butt in jail if you don't manage them right. So these are the things that we set up essentially on the dashboard as things that you need to drill into. Your licensable units, 520 of them have been found in my environment. And when we drill into that, now we can start to see all the software that's really important to us. Let me get rid of my search here. First of all, you can see that all of the software has been normalized. Anybody who's done software asset management knows Adobe Systems Incorporated has listed themselves 30 or 40 ways over the years. If you scan their executables, it might be Adobe Sys, might be Adobe Systems Incorporated, might have a comma, a period, etc. We have to make sure that that's normalized so the vendor is represented the same every single time. We then separate out the product from the vendor, the version from the product, the addition whenever necessary, and then we'll show you the total number of installs. So if I search for Acrobat, we'll filter this list of 520 down to exactly just the copies of Acrobat that are in my environment. Now, there's two ways to look at this piece of software, Adobe Acrobat, right? If we're interested in specifically in XI standard, that particular version, we can click on the number 9, which represents the number of installations that we have in our environment. We can see every single computer that has it installed, which is great. But more importantly, on this side, every user who uses the computer who has it installed, because that's the person who we're going to have to contact, the human being maybe that we have to work with. And that's one view of Acrobat. But if we want a more holistic view of Acrobat as it stands with our license count and our compliance, well, we can come to our license dashboard for Acrobat by clicking on the title name. What this will allow you to do is import to the system through a CSV file that we provide a template for your Acrobat licenses. Once in the system, we will show you what you own, which in this case is 88 licenses of Acrobat. And we'll also allow you to adjust within the system any upgrade and downgrade rights that you might have. So if you've been purchasing your software assurance, you can specify that Acrobat XI standard and professional also cover DC in the newer versions. And here on the comparison chart, we'll show you exactly all the licenses that you own and all of the additions that are installed. And again, if your entitlement, as Paul mentioned, allows you to do downgrade rights, you'll be able to supply that within the system as well. And so we can give you a report of every single individual instance of the software and whether or not that's covered. And then, of course, there's exports out of the product as well. This will show you the spend that you've been accumulating, how many times you've been purchasing those licenses, and which contract or contracts they're associated with. So all of this is really designed to help you manage your licenses and get a handle on what's installed. Avanti will go out and discover everything that's out there, allow you to import your licenses. For things like Microsoft, we actually support an entire MLS import file. So you can import your entire Microsoft license statement, or we provide templates for other software vendors. And you'll very quickly and easily be able to build out a dashboard like this. So just to let you know, we're also working towards the future, right? Traditional on-prem licensing is kind of going the way of the past. We also support SaaS-based licensing, where we can tap directly into various software application vendor portals like Microsoft O365 or Adobe, and retrieve your entitlement data and understand if those entitled users are actively using the software, or if you can reclaim licenses, or if you have additional overspend. So that's a little bit on how Avanti can help make software asset management easier. Not going to lie and say it's always going to be an easy thing to do. It's really sort of a challenge in its nature, but we try to make it as easy as possible, and we're continuing to work on improving that. All right, so
Great. And we have another question in the QA section there.
oh, I see that. Great. So maybe while everybody's doing the poll, we can answer this question. If we want to use discovered reconciled software information to create software installations by business function, would that be built within Neurons or ITAM? The goal will be to define role-based software delivery using discovery information. So that's a great question, anonymous attendee. Thank you so much. That would be done within ITAM. So any kind of workflow, logic, decision-making process, that is typically done through the workflow engine in the ITAM database, in the ITAM platform. And then the discovery information would reflect those changes as those deployments took place. Yep. If you're using a solution like Avanti's Endpoint Manager, you can tie those workflows together and for full automation and completion of those, so that the software delivery engine is executed through the Avanti Endpoint Management. We pass that action from the workflow engine to the endpoint system for delivery. Okay, next question. Hopefully that answers your question. Feel free to type in a follow-up if you like. Lucy, can Avanti discover databases and database names? The answer is yes, but not with this solution. This solution, Avanti's discovery, is mainly focused around endpoints. If you're interested in discovering database servers, all of the databases that are contained within that server, and maybe even which application servers call those databases, which web servers talk to those app servers, and be able to sort of put a name on a service. That's what our discovery for service mapping solution does. So it's really focused just on data center and your private cloud, Azure, AWS, and it will allow you to discover things like a deep dive on a web server, all of its websites, deep dive on a database server, all of its databases, and then understanding the interconnection and communication between them, and then allow you to provide that a name, such as this is our email service, or this is our purchasing application. Did that answer your question? Hope that answered the question.
Okay. And we've got great poll results, and it looks like a little over half are managing their software assets. Just 53%, 40% no. So it's kind of interesting breakdown. So
excellent. Thank you for your participation.
Yep.
Oh, we just finished that.
And here's QA. Great.
All right. Well, guys, again, thank you for the insights here, and thanks to everyone for attending here today. Encourage folks to submit more questions here in our closing few minutes. And so just to summarize across these three sessions, You know, we've covered a lot of ground here from session one, which was around a crawl approach and designing a product catalog and key CI classes, managing the life cycle of these assets, which obviously Paul and Rob have spent a lot of time here again today. So you can tell how important of a topic this is, and then really maintaining control and efficiency with governance. Moving into the walk session, a lot of focus on impact analysis and the use of data, and then you know, again, managing this life cycle through the service request process. And then today, really session 3, as Paul talked about, you know, moving up that maturity pyramid to level 3, more of a run activity, and really critical that you set the foundation with these other areas in order to do this properly, in order to achieve more of a proactive service management environment and application quality of service for the business. And then we've spent a fair bit of time here at the end talking about the importance of managing that software lifecycle, understanding entitlements and manage them accordingly. I know, I'm sure folks here, you know, have all dealt with this. I thought it was interesting, Paul, when you talked about this, you focused on the fact that the vendors will look at as someone undersubscribed. Of course, oversubscription usually doesn't get called out quite as much. So that's not as critical. So it is something that's critically important, and you know, to kind of manage the entire process and assure your service delivery. So do we have any more questions? Somebody, do you see? Oh, I see a couple there, huh?
Yep.
All right.
Those have been answered.
Okay, looks like we did.
Yep.
All right. Well, folks, again, thank you for your participation. I guess just to kind of close this out, you know, one of the questions we typically get here is, okay, so this is an important area and a big topic. How do I get started? And, you know, our recommendation to customers is, you know, first of all, start to take a comprehensive look at your current environment and make sure you understand, you know, what is going on there. I would tell you, we work with a variety of customers across the spectrum of industries and size of companies. And consistently, we hear there are many organizations that don't really have good visibility into everything in their environments. And that's critical, not only for you to be aware of that, what's going on, but to start to set some boundaries around where you need to focus with any initiative. We strongly recommend, and a number of you, I think, have already started some of these one-on-one discussions with us. Follow up with a one-on-one discussion so we can talk more specifically about your initiative. And then really front end your journey with an assessment that will start to define opportunities, outline what your priorities are, and really solidify what the organizational benefits are. It really helps to gain alignment and you know, take your scarce resources and focus them in the proper areas. Okay. So again, thank you so much to everyone for joining. Paul and Rob, thank you for your insights and sharing your experiences here. And we look forward to following up with each of you. And thanks again for joining this important webinar series.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.